Hey folks, welcome back to session number 2. And my name is Elizabeth and I will be your hostess this time. And I want to thank the last panelists. I thought the session was a great one, and thank you, Josh, for chairing it. So, what socialists do in unions? The answer to the question may not be as obvious as it seems. Socialists are not mere observers, not even cheerleaders for the present labor leadership. We are critical advocates of class struggle and workers' democracy. Our speakers, Lisa, Corey, and Julius, will elaborate that. So now we will start with our first speaker. Lisa Cruitt is a vice president of diversity at the Hospital Employees Union, representing Two-Spirit women and non-binary workers. She is also the chairperson of the oldest and largest HEU local. Lisa is currently a student at the Labour College of Canada. She served on the 2022 British Columbia Healthcare Facilities Bargaining Committee, and she organized a rank-and-file campaign around low-wage redress. She is passionate about advocating for progressive labor policies and social justice rooted in anarcho-syndicalist values. So, welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Yeah, that was like the first 1 minute of my speech, so I'm glad that you did it. I mean, it was more or less the same. I don't like talking too much about myself, so I'm glad somebody else did it. Yeah, I've been involved in community organizing here in Vancouver for a long time, and I'm currently on the provincial executive of the Hospital Employees Union. And I do want to talk a little bit about my personal experience with bargaining, but before we get into that, I just sort of want to go over a little bit of history of how we got to where we are today, and some socialist economic values. I know for some people this is going to be very like a remedial, but I really want this to be accessible. And I know there's going to be some people in the audience who maybe this might be their first foray into socialism. So we're going to start with a bit of the academic and then move more into my personal story, because anybody can come up here and read Wikipedia to you. Yeah, we're going to let me see here. I think our socialist principles, especially socialist economic principles, can really be used to make a tangible difference in the lives of our coworkers. And one of the places where we can make the strongest difference for our coworkers is at the bargaining table. The labor movement, I mean, ultimately the labor movement is to try and keep us as workers from competing with each other, but with that goes fighting, for justice, equality, and the well-being of workers, not just our members, but workers in general, trying to raise that bar up. And so this makes the labor movement and to some extent labor organizations a decent fit for socialists. But if we can embrace our socialist principles and our socialist values, we can work to make our unions and our workplaces more equitable. So yeah, I'd like to take a bit of time to demystify some economic theory, because I think one of the mistakes a lot of, especially like newer socialists, make is writing off economics altogether as and I think it's a trick of the bosses, politicians, governments to try and make us believe that economics is something that's just for capitalists and just for conservatives and just for neoliberals, and it's too complicated, and us workers don't need to worry our little heads about that. So, which is so far from the truth. Economics is so important. It's at the core of what we do as socialists. And once we sort of understand our economic values, we can bring them to the bargaining table to hopefully push back against some of the tricks that bosses use to get us to not talk about the things that are important to workers. anyway, yeah, thanks for coming out, and thanks for letting me speak with you for a little bit. Um, and yeah, I'll start out with some of the historical context. Um, so, in the 1980s, the Soviet Union is losing a bit of its influence, global influence, and bosses are seeing that there's not so much of a fear of like a socialist uprising in North America, Europe, and many places in the world. And so we get this sort of death of what they call the sort of golden age of like capitalist labor. So like the sort of 50s to the 70s, this idea that you had a lot of strength at the bargaining table. Bosses were afraid of a socialist uprising, so they'd offer you a little bit more. And then with the Soviet Union sort of going into decline, Ronald Reagan is elected, and then we are introduced in this really powerful way, and Margaret Thatcher in the UK, in this really powerful way to this completely unleashed capitalism that we call neoliberalism. And when we talk about neoliberalism, we're not talking about like social liberalism, like, oh, let people live, let people do what they want. We're talking about liberalism for capitalists, liberalism for billionaires and people that have a lot of money. And it's just this idea that they have that money, they earned it, and they can do whatever they want with it, and taxing it is wrong. And so one of Ronald Reagan's first actions after he was elected was to fire over 11,000 striking air traffic controllers, members of PATCO, Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization. It was a clear signal to workers that your union isn't there to protect you. It's no use organizing. And it was also a strong signal to employers that they could do this sort of thing. They could break unions in a large way, do mass firings. None of their workers were safe, and get away with it. And the PATCO workers, and it did have that effect. It caused a massive sort of decline in faith in unionism. And then it's sort of something that's being repeated globally with neoliberalism, different countries. And here in Canada, one of the manifestations of that is our what we now call the BC United Party. At the time was called, well, in the 80s was called the Social Credit Party, and then the Liberal Party. Um, and so in the early 2000s, the Liberal Party was elected here in British Columbia. And one of their first things was to tear up the contracts of hospital employees, union workers working in the hospitals. Um, they basically just unilaterally said, we're not going to honor this contract. You have to come back to the bargaining table. Massive cuts, massive layoffs. Many of the jobs were privatized, and the jobs that were privatized, it was mostly women workers and workers of color, people working in food services, people working in housekeeping and laundry. Those were the ones that were most heavily targeted. But it did affect everybody. And even up until today, if you're like, even in a male-dominated field, like a trades worker working in a hospital in British Columbia, you're compensated significantly less than a similar trade working in the private sector or even in the public sector for a different employer. So their cuts, they were part of a broader agenda, a neoliberal agenda to privatize healthcare service and really weaken the power of unions in British Columbia and across Canada to send a similar signal that Ronald Reagan did in the 80s, that our unions aren't going to protect us as workers. So both of these, obviously, they're tied together in this broader context of global neoliberalism and the global organizing of capitalism. And that sort of, the ideology is to like reduce government intervention in the economy, privatize as much as possible, deregulate, and promote free market capitalism. As we've seen since the 80s, and especially in the last couple of years, this unleashed global neoliberalism that's sort of considered the default has led to, immense economic inequality, weakened labor rights, and just destruction of social safety networks worldwide. Um, and of course, so these are the values that we're fighting against. These are the values of the bosses and the politicians and the corporations. Um, contrast to socialist values, collective ownership, co-ops, sharing the means of production. Nobody owns the tools, or we collectively own the tools. We collectively own the land and the factory and the workplace. We believe in economic democracy. Um, our economic decisions should be made with input from everybody, but especially from workers. And, this to help promote fairness, a counter to the top-down decision making normally seen in corporations and employers. We fight for strong worker rights, including good wages, safe working conditions, and job security. Whereas neoliberals try to weaken unions and strip away any labor protections. We believe in investing in social welfare programs, strong safety nets, publicly owned services, publicly owned businesses, socialized. And we don't say that word enough, socialized. It seemed to have left our vernacular. People don't like to hear that we're going to socialize the airlines and that sort of thing, but they're fine with hearing, well, we want publicly owned airlines. I think we should say socialized more. Because socializing socialism is the cornerstone to our economic beliefs. Ensuring access to healthcare, education, transport, social services. And I think this is really the main kind of key point of economics in general. It's really a belief in what should we be doing with the excess value that we create after wages are taken. So neoliberals believe that excess value should go to billionaires, should go to corporations, and should stay in people's bank accounts or be invested in the form of more business ventures to create more capital for the capitalist owning class. Whereas socialists believe that, if you work, you make 100 parts, you should in some way get a share of all that value you create. Now, whether that's directly through wages, or through things that benefit us all, public infrastructure, publicly owned corporations. And so understanding these economic principles, and the contrast between neoliberalism and socialism is it's an understanding that the bosses don't want you to know, and they especially don't want you to know at the bargaining table, and they do a lot of things to really undermine our work in labor movements and at the bargaining table. They present economic theory as complex and filled with jargon, and anybody who's not within their sort of orthodoxy of prescribers, of people who control the language, is sort of maligned as like heterodox and not not to be trusted. The complexity is really intentional, as it keeps like working class people from fully understanding and participating in economic discussions and decisions. And by making economics seem inaccessible, those who have the power can maintain control over the conversation, over economic policies, without significant challenge from the public and from the workers. The mystification creates barriers that prevent us from engaging with economic issues that directly affect our lives. It perpetuates a sense of disempowerment, and it discourages collective action. But But it doesn't have to be that way. If you're a worker, you know your wages, hopefully, you know your wages. You see the cuts, you see the deductions on your paycheck. If you're a renter, you might know about gentrification. You might know when your neighborhood's being gentrified, such as my neighborhood. You understand rent. Hopefully, you can make that connection between bosses taking your excess labor value and landlords taking your excess labor value in the form of rent. But all of these sort of ideas, wages, gentrification, rent, if you can kind of understand that, you're already an expert in economics. If you can understand that groceries have doubled in price in the last few years, you understand economics. So using these everyday experiences, we can provide members a practical understanding of key economic principles. We can and when we recognize this expertise in ourselves, in each other, we can empower workers to participate more actively and confidently in these economic discussions. So yeah, I think one of the things before we even get to the bargaining table, one of the things we can do with each other in our locals, social media, is to sort of break down some of these economic concepts into more accessible language and relatable examples such as rent, gentrification, and use real life scenarios that are happening in our community, in our workplace, so that workers can sort of understand how economics is impacting their daily lives. We can hold workshops, seminars like this, discussion groups, book clubs, and we can do this as, part of the union, as our role in the union, but we can also just do this as workers. We don't need the money, we don't need the space and the resources of the union in order to just meet and educate each other. We can create some easy to understand materials, pamphlets, videos, memes. A lot of people become radicalized through memes, other online resources, YouTube videos, whatever, and just sort of encourage members to really think about economics through relatable examples. And when we are presenting these ideas, we need to do it in an environment where we're meeting workers where they're at and that they can feel comfortable asking questions and engaging in debates. Because yeah, like when we make these issues complex, we're just as bad as the capitalists that are trying to take this knowledge away from people and maintain domain over it. Sorry, I lost my spot here. There we go. Yeah. And ultimately through like all of these resources, discussion groups, memes, YouTube videos, we need to make sure that we're promoting the idea that economic decision making should be democratic and inclusive, and it should reflect the voices of workers and what's actually happening in our community. It shouldn't just be something we read about on the news. And so by demystifying economic theory and promoting socialist economics, we can help our members with the knowledge and confidence they need to challenge these neoliberal policies when they're presented to them on the news, on TV, at work by coworkers, and advocate for fair economic practices. And so that's the sort of economic. Oh, wow. Okay. That's the economic half of my talk. The rest of it is going to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done with the Do the Math campaign. And so the Do the Math campaign, it was not an official campaign from the Hospital Employees Union. It started as a populist grassroots initiative. It was driven by frustration and struggles of workers who were tired of seeing their wages lag behind the rising cost of living. And many of the workers were also workers who had suffered pay cuts or layoffs under the Liberal government. The main goal was to reverse the Campbell cuts, but it really, what drew everyone together was the idea about increasing wages, and also fighting the public sector bargaining that we have in British Columbia, creating an argument to sort of bargain outside of this mandate bargaining that the BC Liberals have. And so the campaign helped highlight the gap between workers and wages, specifically in healthcare. We began as sort of a committee at Vancouver General Hospital by spreading the message through social media, through word of mouth. And then we started getting feedback from workers sharing personal stories of when they were laid off or when their wages were cut, and the things that they do to make ends meet on the wages we had. We've heard from members. We heard from a member who was squatting at their work site. We heard from members living in tents. And so the grassroots mobilization created a groundswell of support and brought the campaign to the attention of the organization, of the union. And oh my goodness, so I lost my spot again. And so the campaign did gather a lot of traction, and we created petitions. We sent them to different workers around the province, and we had them faxed back to my office at Vancouver General Hospital. We ended up receiving thousands of responses. About 10% of our bargaining unit responded that they supported the campaign. And the response from the union was not so great. It's when you and this is something that you're going to bump up to if you try and do grassroots campaigns, is that the union quite often will ignore you and then fight you, and then they'll pretend it was their idea. And that's unfortunately how you win. You kind of let them have to take control over it in the end. That's how you end up winning, is it becomes union policy. So what ended up happening was we did have some people elected to the bargaining table, and I was one of them. And we were able to bring the campaign's message and the supporters to the bargaining table, share it with staff, share it with the employer. And the fact that we had such a groundswell of support meant that it eventually became the union's policy, and which they now call the wage comparability review. Once it became the union's official policy, we were able to mobilize staff. I mean, I say we as the organization, because by this point, the organization had taken over. But organize staff to do research and show the disparity between wages and the cost of living, which we could bring to the employer and bring to the Public Sector Employers Council. Ultimately, we were able to bring the sort of employers suggested wage increase of, I believe it was about 2 or 3% over 3 years, up to just over 14% over 3 years. Create a wage comparability review with the employer where they gave us additional top-ups just for HEU members, and then began sort of creating a back channel campaign to prepare for our next round of bargaining. But really, it was the power of grassroots activism. It was the power of socialists at a committee organizing around this cause to influence the union's policies and create something that would ultimately become the union's policies. But we did face barriers. We did have people trying to manage us, personal phone calls asking what's going on, and people telling us it'll never happen. We had activists being contacted, like activists that the union, the organization, thought were sort of key organizers, telling people not to talk to us and not to sign petitions. Like, it got a little bit dirty. But we were persistent and we kept our message positive. Some of the barriers we had were around, we did have some interpersonal conflict around not sort of staying on message, especially around social justice issues. We had people leave over social justice issues. So, I mean, these are important issues, but it is important when you have a campaign like this to make sure that you know what your target is, you identify your target, and you stay on that target until your campaign is done. Don't let yourself be sidelined. Check your ego, check your fragility. Um, you know, if something's irking you in a committee meeting, just try and you know, figure out if now is the time. Um, and so
Please,
yeah,
Doctor.
sorry. I'm being told I've only got a couple minutes left, but I'm almost done here. So but yeah, I just want to recap. You know, it starts out like demystifying these economic theories so that people do understand that it is important to be asking for wages, that money is part of our life and it is important to workers and it will make a meaningful change for our workers. And that although the union, the organization, or the government or the employer has this money, we really do have the people with these grassroots campaigns. If you can find an issue to organize around, people around, you can get those people, and you're not going to outspend whatever organization you're fighting against, whether it's in those early stages and you're trying to get the union to sort of buy into it or the labor movement to buy into it, or in the later stages where you're bringing your case to the employer. You're not going to you're not going to outspend them. Your power is in grassroots mobilization and your people. And yeah, and demystifying economic theory, sharing your knowledge, launching grassroots campaigns. Every grassroots campaign you engage in is a chance to sort of build your socialist movement in your union. And as you're building that movement, you're bringing those voices with you. You can bring those voices to the bargaining table. You can bring those letters and those personal stories to the bargaining table to push for the policy changes you need to make lives better for your members. Let me see here. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess I've got a lot of notes here. A lot of it is academic, but really what it takes what it boils down to is believe in your power. You're gonna have a lot of people trying to shake you. You're gonna have a lot of people trying to put this idea in your head that your cause, that your socialist values are fringe, are never gonna happen, aren't reasonable. But you've got so much power. If you're able to organize, if you're able to get members behind a cause such as wage redress, you've got so much more power than you know, the organization, and the fact that you can connect with members at that sort of grassroots rank and file level it's going to make it easier to go up against the union when you're first mobilizing your campaign. And then go up against the employer. You know, the union spends an awful lot of time in rooms with managers, trying to sort of do their business, do their legal responsibility of representing employers to managers. And while they're doing that, as a grassroots organizer, that's sort of your in to really connect with the workers and instill those socialist values. Anyway, thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'm going to stick around. I'm interested in hearing the other stories as well. So feel free to hit me up in the private message or whatever format we have to ask questions. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you. And there is a format for questions. We'll have a Q&A after all the speakers spoke. So yes, please hang in, Lisa. We want to hear from you. Okay, our next speaker is Corey David. Sorry, Corey. He is a streetcar driver and a member of the Amalgamated Transit Workers Union, Local 113, better known as ATU, and former municipal Socialist Alliance candidate in Ward 20. Corey was the Socialist Action candidate in the January 2021 Scarborough Agincourt by-election. He championed social housing, quality public long-term care, and health care. He worked as a machinist for 7 years, and before that, he supported individuals with developmental disabilities, working as frontline staff at Community Living Toronto and the Toronto District School Board. Welcome, Corey.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
and speaking on this topic. I'll just give you a bit of a brief history of my experience in the workplace and in unions. The first job I had basically out of high school, I was working in group homes for community living Toronto, represented by CUPE, and I was a part-time staff in that during that time, or at least most of the time during that time. And I saw the union when I was hired at whatever is the HR sort of introduction, and I saw the union one other time for some kind of leisure event or something like that. I did not see the union at all, hear from them at all through like the almost 7 years that I was working in community living Toronto. It was before I was active as an activist, as a socialist. I did fashion myself as some kind of socialist, but I didn't involve myself in the union, to be fair. And I sort of had a different outlook, I guess, at the time on the world and on my place in it. After that, I went to become a machinist for a while, working in an ununionized environment. I tried I put a small effort into trying to organize that workplace, but I got a lot of bad feedback from coworkers that I thought were somewhat neutral. I did meet a few people who were very pro-union, but most people, it was kind of a family business, and a lot of people were quite close to management. And I didn't sort of take the risk to push it further. I sort of gauged where I was at, and I didn't want to lose my job at the time. So that was my experience there. And then I worked for another small shop for a few years later on. Um, and then I got hired 2 years ago by TDC to become an operator. And it is a much healthier union being in there. They're a lot more visible. They're a lot more involved in the workplace and in showing up and being there and running activities and campaigns and getting people to meetings. At least they seem, yeah, they definitely are. But by no means are they completely healthy. There's still a lot of that was kind of alluded to, like business management going on. There's a lot of the union does spend a lot of time with management, and as much as they like to sort of do speeches and preach about how they're the enemy or whatever, they don't go to bat for workers as much as they should. And then they will be and just like this, what's going on in this current contract this tentative contract that we've basically gotten, that I have not much information on at this time. Apparently, early next week we should have more details. But the membership was very much about going out on strike if we didn't get what we were asking for. All my coworkers I talked to, some of them had some reservations about it, about not getting paid while they're out and things like that. But people, especially people who've been in the TDC for a while, workers who've been in the TDC for a while, have put up with 16 years of arbitrated contracts, and the union really hasn't had the legal teeth to fight against them. So they were eager to go out, and of course I was encouraging that. I was I said to people that we deserve a fair compensation. We put up with a lot. It's not necessarily a complicated job driving a bus or a streetcar or a subway, but there's a lot of safety concerns. There's a lot of for the actual operation of the vehicle. There's also safety concerns for the personal, like for both passengers and the operators and people just commuting, to do with abuse and assault from other members of the public. So those things are not, and those things are kind of ongoing and are not being addressed by the union exactly. They're a constant problem, especially for streetcar operation, from what I understand, but subways too. They're a constant problem with assaults and abuse, and it is being noted, but it wasn't really a sticking point from what I understand in the contracts. So the workplace issues that we're facing, and same thing when I used to work at community living in Toronto, there was a mountain of issues that we would constantly face, and the union would barely show up to address them. They're often about getting people paid, about making sure people aren't getting fired, which is good, but they really need to look at sort of the toll that the work environment is taking on the employees, and have management actually do something about it, because there's all kinds of health issues, and they do have health and safety committee, but their concerns are not much about the operators and the maintenance workers, and they're more so about keeping things running, and of course punishing employees whenever there's some kind of issue. They'll blame the worker first, and then they will punish them, and then they will threaten them with termination, and then the last thing they'll do is maybe look at what could be done differently on the TDC's part or on management's part to try and change things so that things like this don't happen in the future. So working in this environment, the first year I tried to keep my head down a bit because I'm fairly well known as I ran for city council, and I've run for positions within the NDP before. Anyways, I try to just get through my first 10 months probation, because they can fire you for any reason at any time during probation. And I got through that, and so I started going to union meetings more. I tried to push a May Day resolution for the union to support, which they have supported the Labor May Day Committee's May Day in the past. But there's all kinds of sort of bad blood, I guess, between factions within the union and the people who have pushed the Labor May Day Committee thing in the past. So I didn't organize enough for it, and I only had minimal support when I was there, and I was not able to get it passed. But I brought it to the floor, and we discussed it, and the president even tried to sort of change my resolution, try to get me not to put it forward as a motion and just to ask for the union to just to show up, I guess, or something like that, which I wasn't happy with. So I made sure that we went to a motion. It was defeated, unfortunately, and the president still offered to show up, but I tried to contact them a couple times and didn't hear back, so I let it go. The union did publish something about May Day, which was good to see on their own, about International Workers' Day. And so that's the work that we need to do. So the way I see it, working in a union, or sorry, being part of a union as a socialist, I agree with what a lot of Lisa said about broadening understanding of economics and making sure people understand that just because they're workers and their day-to-day life doesn't really deal with the sort of more complexities of the economy, that they should feel like they shouldn't have a say in it, or they shouldn't be able to talk about it, and that they shouldn't be involved in how an economy is formed. So that's what I really try to push amongst people, to believe in themselves, among my coworkers, to let them know that they are worth it, to always let them know that the sort of ridiculous amounts of the ridiculous extravagance that our bosses live in, and the people who really own the world live in, and that what we're asking for is nothing in comparison, and that we are in every way more essential and more important in our contribution to the world than those people that are making a killing off of extorting working people. So I make sure that I always let workers know that. I mean, I try to be tactical about it. I don't just go in the room and start announcing things, or just start trying to start up a conversation about something that no one is talking about or whatever. But whenever whenever people are discussing things, which people always discuss their life, what's going on, what their situation is, or what they're dealing with or whatever, I always try to frame it from a socialist perspective, and to get people to think about it in that sense, and to get people to think about others as well, because there are so many different people within the union coming from so many different places, and some people really get it and they really feel for each other, and some people are very tied up in their own lives, and some people are also selfish, and they think that they just deserve that they should only be concerned with themselves and not with what else is going on. But I try to talk to everybody, and even people who are against my views in a lot of ways or whatever. I try to talk to them about the bigger picture and about how it all affects us. Just because you are doing okay and whatever, like I'll talk to people, just because they're doing okay and they don't need to fight for more or whatever, doesn't mean that there aren't other people. And that if there's this race to the bottom, and we're just going to continue to give away all the things we have and not fight for any more public or socialized enterprises or works or environments or whatever, then we're going to lose it all. It's going to continue. Just because you're safe now doesn't mean you're going to be safe later. And I don't know. I don't know. I just think that I always, when I think about being a socialist, I always think about Rosa Luxemburg's quote about saying loudly what's going on is one of the most revolutionary things you can do. And so I try to, you should never let anything slide. If there's people being intolerant, we have people who are anti-trans at the TTC. We have people who are definitely anti-Palestinian at the TTC, people who are Zionists. And if someone says something against them, I will not let it go. But having said that, they're still my coworkers, and I will talk to them if they are, willing to talk about things. But it is important to be principled in the union, in every possible way. Just because you have a bad manager, if people are, piling on insults or unfair criticisms, I don't believe that you should also join in on that. I believe that we should be principled and give fair criticism, and be honest about what actually is going on, and not join in just because all everyone else is doing it or whatever, and they're all the workers too, right? It's not right in my eyes, and we need to be consistent as socialists, because that same thing can come back to hurt us. So so we need to present a principled socialist outlook to our coworkers, and be persistent about it, as Lisa said. But that's something else, I think, but be persistent about it. I haven't been organizing in the union for a long time, so I don't have a ton of experience. But I would just say that in union meetings, when members are attacked, I try to be fair. If people are sort of like, there was someone who posted something, a video, it was a shop steward. Well, I'll just say he was a member of the union, and he posted something in support of Palestinians, but he said that he would go to Israel and fight and maybe kill Israelis or whatever, right? And he was sort of he was attacked by people. He was consistently attacked by people in the meeting and in previous online social media posts or whatever. And people said like, oh, once you've had that view, you can't change or whatever. I mean, I don't think the comrade had to, or the brother or whatever, had to, apologize or whatever. He even cleared it with the union. They had meetings and discussed what happened or whatever, right? But just sort of these allegations that someone can't change, or that it's ridiculous to have that sort of view, and to have some prominent union members, saying those kinds of things. It's important to denounce them. So it's important to be principled, and to be honest about what's going on, and how you feel about things, and bring in all the struggles that we're working towards, and then try to get the union on side with those. I mean, it's not always easy. There's a lot of the leaders in the unions are in my union anyways, are I think, at least somewhat opportunistic, and they're trying to play everyone so they can stay in that position. So they don't want contention. They don't want to talk about Palestine. They don't want to talk about Russia, Ukraine. They want to focus on TDC. I see this thrown around all the time in chat groups. This isn't union business, or whatever, and it could not be the furthest. It could not be the further from the truth. It is union business, because unions are about solidarity. Unions are about not compromising each other, so that we can all get a fair deal, and that includes to oppress peoples around the world. Yeah, so I do argue with people, but I try to keep it professional and stick to the facts. Let people throw whatever mud they want. I'll try to be consistent, and in my dealings, and hopefully people will appreciate that, and they'll come to me, when they want to talk about something, because they'll appreciate that I'm, not just insulting everyone, not trying to burn down the chat room or whatever. Anyways, so that's been my experience in unions. I think some of the next stuff I will be trying to do is to build a solidarity group for Palestine. We'll see. There is some support, but like I said, there's a lot of people. There's definitely sort of a mass of people within the union, at least who are vocal within the union, who don't want to discuss it, who don't want to discuss international issues, who don't want to discuss social justice issues outside of the workers' rights, or outside of the workers' movement. So yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at. I'm thinking about how to do that next. The big thing is the big thing right now at the ATU is this contract. It's tentative. The membership still has to vote on it, and I'm seeing from a lot of people. It's interesting seeing a lot of people who are in positions within the union, like in elected positions, are really pushing that this contract is the best that we can get, or the best that the negotiation team could have gotten, and that we should accept it, because maybe rightly from their experience, if we do go out on strike and we end up getting put to arbitration, whether legislated back or whatever, that we're not going to get as good a deal as this potentially. That's what people. That's what everyone. Every executive board member has signed off on it. So they are definitely in favor of this deal. And then even people from Joint Health and Safety or other committees within the union are almost. I think everyone I've seen comment about that is in one of those positions and is saying that it's a fair deal. I've also seen retirees try to say that, you know, try to sort of defeatism, saying that we're not going to get better, and if we go out, we're actually going to get worse, and and that, you know, just praising the negotiation team and its leadership, and you know, I'll be fair. Like I think that the leadership has done a decent job in these negotiations in standing firm up until the last minute when they pulled the rug out on a strike that was about to happen, a strike that they themselves even declared a few hours earlier in the day, around 6 or 7 p.m. The union declared that we would be going out on Friday, that we would be on strike, and then at 11:45. Prior to that, they were said, oh, there's some progress being made. And 11:45, they said they've reached a framework for a deal, and they're going to iron out the details. But management played games with the union for months, for 4 months, I believe, since February, and would kept threatening our jobs with contracting out and privatization. I mean, and with cross boundary, which means letting other transit organizations work within the city, that would work on city city transit that would normally be done by ATU members.
2 minutes
So they,
remaining.
thank you. So they kept those threats up until the last minute, and then they took that language out at the last minute. Is my understanding, anyways. I could be wrong on those details, but that's my understanding from what the president said and other members of the negotiation team. So so I've been telling everybody that why wouldn't we go out, you know, on the picket lines and think about what they offered us? Like they've been thinking about it for months now, not offering us a fair deal. And a lot of not the grassroots, sorry, I shouldn't say, well, I should say the broad membership. A lot of the broad membership that I see commenting that I've spoken to are they wanted to go out. They wanted to go out regardless, because they've had to put up, you know, the people who are veterans had to put up with arbitration for the last 16 years, and the people who are new are you know, are living, I guess, or working in this environment that's incredibly toxic, where issues just are just not dealt with, and management is brutal towards employees, especially operators, from what I understand, and that we make a fair wage, but we, you know, the sorry, not, you know, but the compensation has been stagnant at about 2% over those past 16 years, and it's been a real loss in wages, like a loss in real wages, I should say, for transit workers. So a lot of people want to go out, and you know, one comment I saw was the workers have tasted blood, and they want it because they get screwed around by management all the time. They get screwed around, you know, they get left alone, abandoned in this city when things go wrong, because we don't have the support there, or the procedures there, or the resources to make sure that we have a good working environment, and a lot of that comes from other places in the city that are lacking, like the underhoused community not having access to social housing or any housing, the massive amount of drug addiction, and just, you know, I guess other things in the city like bigotry or racism, or other attacks, people who are against people who are anti against the LGBTQ community. So there are tons of issues that transit workers face, and it's really important that we understand each other, because it's very different working a night shift than it is working a day shift. There are different challenges. So it's important. I always try to talk to my coworkers about what their work is like. I have a pretty good relationship with people I trained with, and I'm trying to broaden that relationship. And the next step will be to try and maybe organize. Will be to try and organize members within that I know into a voting block or something like that, or get a campaign going. I will see and plan for the future. But that's been my experience. And I will leave it at that, and I'll see what questions come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Okay, our next speaker is Julius Arscott. He is a former 3-term executive board member of the Ontario Public Service Employees Union to current president of Local 532, and has been active in the labor movement for 15 years. He works in the Ontario Public Service, has been active in labor for Palestine, and launched a campaign for BDS in a union 15 years ago, which he has been building ever since. Julius has campaigned against concessions bargaining, for union democracy, and mass action to bring down the boss's agenda and their government. He was a former Worker Action Movement candidate for president of the Canadian Labour Congress, better known as the CLC, and a WAM candidate for Secretary-Treasurer of the Ontario Federation of Labour that we know as the OFL. So it's my pleasure now to call on Julius.
Thank you, comrade. It's great to be on this panel with comrades Lisa and Corey. I think this discussion on what socialists do in unions is fantastic. So my talk is going to basically focus around critique of the labor bureaucracy, along with some examples of tactics and strategy of our work that I've done in the labor movement for the last 15 years or so. I will say that in March of this year, I announced that after 3 terms on the executive board that I would not be seeking re-election to the executive board for family reasons. I'm a new father and I want to spend some more time with my kids. And I've been going at this for a little while, so I'm just taking a little bit of a break. But I first ran for the executive board in 2017 as an open socialist, campaigning against wage freezes, for labor solidarity with the House of Labor, against concessions and 2-tier bargaining, for union democracy, and for mass action to bring down the Doug Ford government. I've been involved with and organized several formal and informal campaigns, including what was called the We Own It campaign for public services, the Stop the Wage Freeze campaign, the OPSU Solidarity Group, which demanded that OPSU return to the Ontario Federation of Labour. Our president at the time got into a tiff with the leader of the OFL and stopped paying dues. For NDP affiliation and solidarity with the Palestinian people through the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign with comrades in the Workers' Action movement. Throughout my 3 terms on the executive board, I had the honor and privilege of fighting alongside many great activists. Through hard work, dedication, and principled working class politics, we helped forge a new vision for our union. This is work that will continue in the period ahead. In my role as executive board member, I called for mass action to challenge the boss's agenda at every opportunity. I campaigned and won the union executive to support open bargaining, as well as union support for remote work. I brought motions to the board which called for solidarity with workers across Canada, farmers protesting in India, and workers of Palestine, with varying degrees of success. We made donations to the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement in support of relief efforts following the horrific earthquakes in Turkey and Syria in 2023. I won motions which called on the union to organize active mass visible support for healthcare workers against the anti-vaccine, anti-mandate campaigners, though there was no follow-through from the leadership of the union at that time. And I won language which called on our union and the National Union of Public and General Employees, which is called NUPGE, to express our opposition to the Undemocratic Emergencies Act. I moved an extra $1 million into our strike fund. In my first term, I was the board liaison to the Coalition of Racialized Workers Caucus, and most recently was the liaison to the Provincial Young Workers Committee. I was elected to the Strategic Planning Committee, the Solidarity Funds Board, as the International Solidarity Coordinator, and sat on the Political Action Committee. In 2023, I was endorsed by OPSU CEFPO for my run for Secretary Treasurer of the Ontario Federation of Labour. Much of this work was done while wearing many hats, as was mentioned in the previous session. There's no shortage of work to be done. And it certainly wasn't easy work, especially under the previous administration, and now with the pressure of being a new father. While I can honestly say that the majority of my experience on the board was working within a toxic environment, and just to give you an example, in my first term, 1/3 of our executive board resigned before the end of their mandates. This past term, with our new progressive leadership under JP Hornick, has been indeed a turning point for the culture of the board and our union in a much more positive and hopeful direction. Our union now prioritizes building public service worker power to advance social and economic justice for all workers, with values of the union being member-driven and worker-centered with a focus on diversity and inclusivity. Our goals include challenging bosses and anti-worker legislation at a greater scale, collective bargaining leading to better and more inclusive contracts, creating a culture that supports strategic risk-taking, and members seeing clear actions to advance equity, combating anti-Black racism, anti-indigeneity at every level of the organization. All of this and more is laid out in the strategic plan, which is a recent document which was approved by the board. And none of it would have happened without the hard work of socialists over many years in our union. Now, some on the left have argued that socialists should not directly challenge our union leadership by running for top positions in elections. We disagree. Recent events in OPSU-SEFPO and in other unions around the world have shown that we have a responsibility to do so. Of course, elections are not the only focus, but the question of leadership cannot be ignored, as good leadership opens the doors for the advancement of working class struggle, which is sorely needed in these difficult times. We believe that an organized left-wing movement is needed to effectively advance working class struggle and challenge the business as usual unionism, which is so prevalent today. We are living in one of the most active periods of union struggle seen in decades across North America. Workers in the public sector, film industry, education, healthcare, and the auto industry have all been impacted in this wave against the boss's low-wage policies. We have also seen rank-and-file rejection of poor collective tentative agreements and opposition to business-as-usual unionism. In 2022, 55,000 education workers, members of CUPE's OSBCU, engaged in an illegal strike that after attempts by Ontario Conservative Premier Doug Ford introduction and passing of Bill 28, which included a notwithstanding clause, back to work. This successful action defined back to work legislation and engaged in an illegal strike, which included over 10,000 CUPE members and Labour allies at Queen's Park and thousands more at MPP constituency offices across the nation, was built in 4 days. Only an emergency rally in front of 400 University Avenue and march to Queen's Park 2 days prior led up to the inspiring action at Queen's Park, prompting activists to demand a general strike at times during speeches by Labour leaders. At this point, OPSU-SEFPO Sector 3 had already walked off the job and engaged in an illegal solidarity strike in support of CUPE Ontario workers. Unions from across Canada committed millions of dollars in support. CUPE Ontario and Labour allies forced Doug Ford to back down. The Premier's last-minute, unexpected pledge to end Bill 28 was a major victory to the working class and Labour movement. Mere hours prior to the Labour movement planning announcement of a major protest action to take place at Queen's Park on November 12th and a province-wide general strike to take place the following Monday on November 14th, resulting in plans for action to be put on standby. If Ford had not rescinded Bill 28, the experience of a general strike would have built confidence and much needed solidarity amongst the working class in the highest populated province in Canada. And it's possible that the demands could have been expanded, which went well beyond Bill 28 and better working conditions, including towards the rescinding of Bill 124, higher wages for all workers, including a $25 minimum wage, democratic reform, indeed the removal of Doug Ford as Premier, galvanizing the left as a mass movement against the rise of the far-right forces in Canada. Potentially anything was on the table. Defying back-to-work legislation and initiating solidarity strikes are the examples of the kind of action our movement needs to survive. Workers are suffering a terrible cost of living crisis. Decades of concessions bargaining taking the form of low-wage increases and the horrors of two-tier bargaining led to the financial crisis workers face today. With high inflation and high interest rates, many of us are at the breaking point. Many of us say enough is enough. Leaders of our movement must be bold and vocal proponents for mass job action and not simply act as bureaucratic administrators, which we see far too much of. Strikes get the goods, and a general strike would open up opportunities to make real structural change. It would reaffirm organized labor's role in society by hitting the capitalist class directly. Much is now at stake. The anti-union, bigoted, transphobic far right is on the rise in Canada, across Canada, and really around the world. Punished by a declining standard of living, some workers are unfortunately and unknowingly being pulled into right-wing populism. The labor movement is a potential counterweight to the campaign of hate, but we need to earn the trust and confidence of workers both inside and outside of the labor movement. Labor needs to demonstrate that we are the force for progressive change and economic justice. We must also stand with oppressed peoples around the world, be it in Palestine or Congo. Solidarity knows no bounds. Labor must challenge our government's complicity in the ongoing ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians and support the international boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign. End the occupation. Ceasefire now. Free, free Palestine. I see lots of free Palestines in the chat. Likewise, the climate emergency can only be effectively challenged by labor. Decades of summits and global conferences in exotic sounding locations around the world, attended by the most privileged elites, have resulted in no meaningful action to stop climate catastrophe. There are no jobs on a dead planet, and we need a just transition now. What do we need to survive as a labor movement? Greater union democracy. And we must stand with those in our movement who take risks which benefit us all. We must reject all forms of concessions bargaining and embrace diversity and inclusion. And frankly, we must win better collective agreements for our members. The Canadian working class has two main weapons today in the fight against the ruling class. The labor-based NDP represents the political wing, and our labor unions represent the organized labor wing. Both wings of the working class are dominated by a social democratic bureaucracy, which has run the show for several generations, maintaining status quo business unionism. This hasn't, however, prevented breaks from the status quo. Examples include everything from the Winnipeg General Strike to the CUPW Wildcat Strike for maternity leave. In 1972, the General Strike of the Quebec Common Front was the largest strike in North America's history. The strike, which involved over 250,000 public and private sector workers, was a very important moment in Quebec's self-determination and struggle for rights. This show of force caused the government to release union leaders, which had been arrested, and to agree to renegotiate, eventually leading to the fulfillment of some of the campaign's demands. Also, the strike inspired workers across Canada and eventually led to the 1976 Canada-wide general strike of 1.2 million workers. Workers continued their struggle for rights, or as Quebecers would say, la lutte continue. Of course, we have the recent example of the province-wide general strike, which took place in Quebec, where 600,000 strikers, or 13% of the Quebec workforce, struck against the boss state. 78% of the strikers were women, fighting both for better working conditions and for the socialization or caring. This strike was also a feminist struggle, more precisely an ecofeminist one. Public services run mainly on human labor with less reliance on fossil fuels than manufacturing. Above all, they are creators of rich human links that can be obstacles to consumerism and miserable isolation. There have been several attempts at mass labor action in the last decade, including the postal workers' strike and the teacher strike here in Ontario, the dock workers' strike in Montreal, and the hospital support staff wildcat strike in Alberta. Most of these examples are from a few years ago. And all of these strikes were ended by provincial or federal governments which used back-to-work legislation to end the strikes. In Canada, the constitutional right to strike exists until workers use it. The response from organized labor, including provincial federations of labor and the Canadian Labour Congress, have been mostly pathetic. And in fact, the misleadership of the labor movement has relied on court rulings, which can take a decade to get, and often reaffirm our right to strike, and yet have very little real-world impact on fighting the boss, as back-to-work legislation is the go-to for the state. And it was threatened again with ATU workers who were about to go on strike just in the last 24 hours. An important exception to this, of course, is the OSBCU members who I referred to earlier in the speech. Corporate Canada breaks laws on a regular basis, and this tactic is seen as the cost of doing business. White-collar crime has seen a steady increase, and yet the labor lieutenants of capital refuse to break the boss's laws at any level, to the detriment of workers everywhere. Working people were on the front lines fighting COVID-19 with inadequate support from our employers and the labor movement. We see how difficult it is to live with a high cost of living, while many in our union leadership continue to sell us on settling for less. The bosses are united and have a common purpose. Only when the workers are united in action for a workers' agenda can we go forward and win. That is the potential of the working class, and it can realize its revolutionary potential with new leadership that we socialists must provide. The Palestinian Solidarity Movement on the streets and on campuses, organized by the Palestinian Youth Movement, students, and allies, has shown us what a mass movement can do. This movement, which has involved socialists and unions, has compelled the labor leadership to shift gears in some important cases. Many unions in Canada have now called for a permanent ceasefire, and an increasing number are now adopting boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Workers want a union movement which is engaged in the class struggle, a movement which does not shy away from defending the interests of our class around the world, such as the plight of the Palestinian people against the oppressive apartheid state of Israel, a movement which will take a leading role in fighting fascism and eco-catastrophe head-on. Across the country and around the world, there is a labor awakening. Strikes to contend with rising costs of living and growing job insecurity are shaking the establishment. From giant grocery chains to sprawling dockyards, from federal public services to salt mines, to railway car makers, to liquor stores, to movie and TV production sets, workers are standing up. Many who choose to strike do so only after turning down flawed tentative agreements recommended by conservative union leaders. Meanwhile, the bosses bank billions in profit and serve the interests of the warmongering, nature-destroying ruling capitalist class. The solution, of course, is to put movement back into the labor movement. This can be done only by means of direct job action, to defend the right to strike, to actively fight concessions bargaining, 2- and 3-tier wages and benefits, attacks on our pensions, to stop flirting with the Liberal Party, to demand a workers' agenda inside the NDP, and to fight for a workers' government. A unified left wing within the labor movement is needed. We in Socialist Action played a role in the workers' action movement. WAM campaigned for an end to concessions bargaining, 2-tier wages, undemocratic union practices, and urged a general strike to dump Thug Ford. We regularly ran candidates within the House of Labor and earned up to 36% of the vote. Elected officers should be paid no more than the average salary of the workers they represent. Union members should be able to vote directly on bargaining demands, on contract ratification, and on proposals for mass job action. We are for open bargaining. Unions should make a priority of unity in action with social justice movements, international solidarity causes, and the environmental protection campaigns. Give life to the vision that together we must build a better world. Change does not happen automatically, like a gift from the boss. It comes through working class struggle. It always has. We must stop relying on arbitrators, the boss's legal system, and reliance on the boss's parliament, which has gotten us exactly to where we are today. We must build a mass movement to beat the boss's austerity agenda. A class struggle leadership of the labor movement is necessary. Socialists aim to spark that movement and organize new leadership. Socialist Action is the only revolutionary party or organized revolutionary activist organization which is involved in the workers' movement in Canada, both in the NDP and the labor movement, which openly challenges the status quo. Some on the left adapt their politics to join the bureaucracy. Others abstain and claim that the labor movement is too far gone to make any real change. Socialist Action is a prime mover of WHAM, just as it is a prime mover of the NDP Socialist Caucus. And why is that? Because the future of humanity will be decided by the working class within its main organizations, provided that revolutionary leadership is consciously organized. To make it happen before it's too late for nature and civilization, join the struggle, join Socialist Action.
Thank you, Julius. Okay, so now, folks, we're going to open to the Q&A. And we have hands up, and we also have questions in the chat. Now, I hope people, I know I see some hands that got their hands up, but also got questions in the chat. So, first of all, if you don't have a question in the chat, please keep your hand up for now. If you don't, then we will see as we go along. Okay, so Carrie, I'm going to go to you to take 2 questions from the chat. And I think I saw An's hand up earlier. If that's not the case, please let me know. And we will take one from the floor, so to speak. So, and then I'll go back to the panel and tell you your time and who starts first. Corey?
Oh,
The first
yeah,
question from the chat. I think the
yes,
first question was from Josh.
that's right. Would you like me to read them?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. So the first question from Josh is, what role do socialists in unions have within the Palestinian solidarity movement, and how do they mobilize within their locals to get union leadership on board? And second question we have from Trevor, that is somewhat related to the first question. But yeah, to what extent do socialists have to be cautious when first becoming active in their unions and putting forward socialist ideas? Is it not risky to one's own career, especially in a trade, to do this? And how can one reduce this risk? Take the most strategic approach. For example, speaking from personal experience, I wouldn't want to go to my union as an apprentices and start talking about Palestine or climate change or rent strikes or anything too far left immediately. Because as an apprentice, I'd likely be putting my job at risk. I assume I should at least wait until I'm a journeyman, for example, and even then, should one pick and choose their battles? How does one go about first getting active? Those are the 2 questions, Chair.
Okay, I thought I saw a hand up, but nobody's got their hand up now. So we'll just go with 2 this time. So you each have up to 5 minutes to answer. And I'm going to start with Julius, then Lisa, then Corey. Julius?
Okay, thanks for the questions. They're very good. So you'll see the background around me. This is part of a campaign that I helped organize through the Labor for Palestine. I think that there is actually a lot of movement around this issue across the labor movement across Canada, and I would love to hear what Lisa and Corey, what experiences you, Corey alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I'd love to hear particularly if there's anything happening in Lisa's union around this or what you've observed. This is a major issue in the labor movement right now. And really, as somebody was involved with it for quite some time, who's brought multiple BDS motions over a decade now to the OPSU convention, being in a leadership position helped me immensely because as a board member, I received emails and communications from members across the province who are demanding that the union take a principled stance in support of Palestine. And I connected. Now the board ignored them. They didn't want to touch it because we had no language in OPSU that basically addressed this issue. And unfortunately, majority of the board are very opportunistic, unprincipled people. But of course, I took advantage of the situation, connected with these individuals, and helped to funnel everybody into a common space. And Labor for Palestine just happened to make a lot of sense at the time, and it's really flourished into something quite good. And we're organizing. We've organized actions where we've fought for the presence of our union to be accepted by the leadership and by the union as a whole at Palestine solidarity demonstrations. We've organized locals to pass motions in support of BDS, in support of a ceasefire. Our work has really shifted the labor movement and our union in particular. And a lot of that, some of that was through precedents that were set at the Ontario Federation of Labor by resolutions that were adopted there, which allowed our provincial young workers to put on educationals. Now, that's not to say that, we've been challenged by a pro-Zionist element within our union, who's also organized, and we continue to fight them. But we're on the upswing for certainly in our union, and potentially at the very close to some significant victories in terms of language and policy being adopted in our union. It's not the first time that we've ever been involved with this, but the last time would have been the fight against South African apartheid in the 80s. And maybe early 90s. I was not part of that at the time. In regards to precarious workers, yes, I mean, there's not a lot of value in socialists who are in a precarious employment losing their jobs quickly and losing their positions within their union. So you have to be tactical and careful. I always recommend, of course, participating in a union meeting, speaking at it, getting people to know who you are. I encourage that from the offset. I think we also have to acknowledge that more and more our workforce is precarious. And I've argued this in our union that we have to accommodate these folks, notwithstanding the socialists that are among them, but even participating in your union in some workplaces puts you in a vulnerable situation when you're precarious. It's a big problem. But I think the best thing to do is to get yourself known within your local. If you're in a precarious situation, you'll find and meet people who, it's not to say you can't talk about progressive things. You can have those one-on-one conversations when the opportunities arise, where you can gauge where people are at, the individuals you're talking to, and they may be able to help you get into a situation where you're no longer precarious, or provide some advice for that. And as you lose that precarity, participating in campaigns that the union may put on, volunteering when you can. I mean, a lot of our work, in my own experience, and tell me when my time's over, Chair, or when I'm getting close. But a lot of my initial involvement with the union was talking about some of the big idea stuff, but also doing the work that needs to be done within the local, and you gain people's respect and confidence when they see that you it's great, you've got some big ideas, but you're also doing the necessary work of the local. So the grunt work, I guess you could say, that work is important. So I would say, become a steward at the earliest that you can, where you feel that your job is secure, and go from there. And of course, the benefit of being in a party like Socialist Action, or really any group on the left, is that you have your comrades to rely on, who can provide advice and support through the difficult times. Sometimes I think that leftists get involved in these spaces, and if they're alone or isolated, they're more susceptible to being pressured by the
30
bureaucracy.
seconds.
And I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julius. Lisa?
Yeah. So yeah, I am involved a little bit in the pro-Palestine movement. I do a little bit of work outside of my union with independent Jewish voices. And I think when you're facing Zionist opposition within your organization, it is helpful to have or have Jewish people who can sort of help explain you know, the mindset of Zionism, because I think if you haven't sort of been exposed to it or raised in it, it can be difficult to wrap your head around just how much pressure there is to conform with Zionism or be like a good Zionist in the Jewish community. Here in Canada specifically, there's a concerted effort here in Canada to equate Zionism and Judaism, and which is obviously not true. Zionism is a right-wing political ideology, and Judaism is a religion. But here in Canada, there's been sort of an international concerted effort to sort of promote Zionism in the community. But I think in the labor movement, aside from learning about Zionism and the whole history, because that's a lot of reading, there's more accessible ways to sort of instill anti-Zionist values. I don't even think you're instilling the values. I think the values are already there, but I think it's a matter of connecting the dots or making them accessible. Palestinian workers, particularly in occupied territories, are facing just such awful working conditions, restrictions on movement, and if you're Palestinian and working in Israel, you've got a second set of labor standards and laws, which really brings down the labor standards for the entire region, for the entire interconnected economic region. And that has global impacts. The restrictions that are placed on Palestinians limit access to jobs for Palestinians in the Middle East, but also create an economic dependency that really undermines fair labor practices in the entire Middle East. And for anybody who's planning to, be involved in anything in the Middle East, there's also a lot of in Palestine restrictions on freedom of association, restrictions on joining a union, and what rights you have if you are a worker, what rights you have to collectively bargain, fight for health and safety rules. This all ties back to labor work that we're doing here in Canada. A lot of labor movements see themselves as part of a global struggle for economic rights, and it's interconnected internationally with other unions and with other workers around the world. And so strengthening those Palestinian rights or supporting that fight is part of the work that your union should be doing, whether or not they have official language in their policies and procedures manual. And I mean, that's not even to say that the impacts of conflict and the fact that most unions should be anti-war. Labor movements should be advocating for peace and stability because they are crucial for creating safe and equitable working conditions. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I didn't even get to the other question. The other question was around safety in the self-identifying as a socialist at work. And I mean, it's not really something I can speak on because I'm a healthcare worker and a public sector worker. I know it's much different in my work site, but in my personal experience, I've found that a lot of people are really open in my work site to socialist values, whether it's safety nets, something to help you along between jobs. I can't speak for your work site and I can't speak for your work as a tradesperson, but a lot of people are really open to socialist economic values as long as I don't use the word socialism, as long as I don't come out of the gate, and also as long as I keep it accessible, as long as I say, hey, we're fighting for strong supports for, seniors, for strong uh, yeah, a strong safety net. I'll just say a strong safety net. And get those socialist values sort of ingrained in people before I bring out the big red flag or anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Corey?
Yeah, thanks. Those are both very great responses. About working in Palestine, I'd say look for allies is what I'm trying to do, and talk to people about just the realities out there. I've talked to so many coworkers that are so upset about what's going on, and because of when I talked about sort of the atmosphere of neutrality or of focusing on union business, as people like to say, that they feel like they can't express what they're feeling about the situation there, and that they can't ask the union to do something about it, because there's like this virtual sort of bullying going on, or at least sort of pressure not to. So and then when you can stand up for people that do bring this issue forward, and in union meetings especially, and like I said, I've been tying to the other question. I have been careful at ATU to not give away too much of what I'm about over my probation, but now I'm quite open about it. I don't just go announcing that I'm a socialist everywhere, and that we should be that we should be freeing Palestine or whatever. But I will bring it up, and especially around Palestine, just because it's ongoing and it's just so atrocious what's going on there. So I will bring it up, and I'll look to be maybe bringing a motion to my union to at least either to stand in solidarity with the oppressed Palestinian people, or even just to get a ceasefire, even just to get them to sign onto a ceasefire motion would be some progress. Yeah, there are Zionists, and I've already been called an anti-Semite by some of my coworkers. So be prepared for that. And but a lot of like most people are, just from the very human aspect of what's going on, are very open to supporting a solidarity motion, or to having the union support Palestinian human rights and the right of Palestinian nationhood. And especially, like, I work in a workplace that has 12,000 employees, and has tons of people from different places around the world. So a lot of those people come from places that are not colonies like Canada, or maybe they are colonies like India or something like that. And so they see they understand the occupation to some extent, and the colonization, and being from an oppressed nation. So there's a lot of experience there that leads people to support Palestine, and so I'll be looking to build that at ATU. And in terms of being, like I mentioned, I laid low during my probation to do with the other question, to do with how brazen should you be as a socialist within a union if your position is precarious. It didn't mean I didn't talk to people about things, but I didn't really get involved in union stuff during my probation. I wanted to focus, for one, to get through it, and whatever. So as Julia said, you need to be tactical about your interventions and about what you're going to be doing. But it's important that, I mean, as socialists, we take risks because we are fighting for something important, and we know, and we should know, that sometimes we have to risk something for that. We know that even being a socialist, times could change, and it could become just a risk to be known as a socialist. But so we do take risks, but it's important to gauge that. As Julia said, we're no good if we're just going to be not a member of the union, not a worker anymore there. So we need to be tactical, and to decide when to take those risks, and how much of a risk to take. But that's something we need to think about. I don't think we need to shy away from intervening and from talking about issues, but just to be tactical about it, I guess. And as Julia said, being a member of an organization, you have tons of resources of other people's experiences and whatnot in these situations that you can talk to them about.
Please,
And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Corey. Okay, so that's the end of round one. Now we're going to go into round two, and I will ask Flo to read two questions for round two. Flo?
Sure. So the first question is actually from me. How can labor pushing back on the political class line that the economy is good actually help strengthen militant labor and broader working class movements? Second question is from Mark Lister. How can we build solidarity in locals with different types of workers, for example, trades versus office workers, who may have different concerns and demands?
Okay, thank you, Flo. So you each have 5 minutes to answer, and I will start with Corey, then Julius, then Lisa. Corey?
Sure. So how can labor push back? I mean, if an economy is good, and I mean, if it's supposedly good, then workers should be reaping the benefits of that strong economy. As we often say, workers create the economy. You know, they should be in control of it. So that's something you could argue that workers, well, they create everything. Nature and labor creates everything we have. Um, so that's sort of the arguments that we should be bringing to people, is that we are the ones that created this strong economy, and we deserve to reap the benefit of it. Billions of dollars sitting in someone's account or sitting in investments isn't doing any good for the economy, or most likely it's bouncing around between different investments with these games that are played. As besides the point. But if an economy is strong, then it should be workers and it should be the community that is reaping the benefits of that strong economy. And that'll just be my argument for that. Solidarity between different sort of sectors or whatever within the economy. I mean, we all rely on each other. It's so important. As much as people feel like maybe they can take care of themselves, or they know enough about what they do that they don't. We all need each other at times, depending what our situation is in our life, and that always changes as well. So I don't know. I'm speaking kind of broadly about it, but you know, just simply, like, if you want the public, or you want any union or workforce to support you in your struggles, in your workplace struggles, in your union struggles, then you should be willing and adamantly wanting to support other people in theirs, because we know that there's a race to the bottom, and that's something that gets thrown around, that like how low wage increases are and how benefits are being slashed, how quality jobs or full-time jobs are being reduced and whatever in favor of part-time and precarious work. We know there's a race to the bottom, so we should really be challenging that everywhere, because it'll be your workplace next if you don't put up with it. People think that maybe because they're in a skilled trades, their job is protection because it's limited how many skilled people there are. But there's all kinds of ways that bosses and the capitalist government can rig things to undermine workers, and so we really do need to be standing in solidarity with each other. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Next we have Lisa.
Oh, there we go.
No, we don't. I'm sorry, Lisa. We have Julius and then you. Sorry
thank
about
you.
that,
That's
comrade.
okay. I wasn't ready anyway. So.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. So as I read Flo's question being, you know, how would pushing back on the idea of the economy being good, or things being good, help build capacity? So I think that you know, I think that pointing out the contradictions that we're all facing is obvious to most people these days. And that includes people who work in the trades. I think a few years ago, you know, even like 10 years ago, the economic divide between folks who worked in the public sector versus the private sector may have been a little bit more spread out, where people, you know, frankly, the trades are doing really well. People who worked in the trades were making really good money. At least I'm speaking from my own experience and knowledge in Southern Ontario, where we've had a ridiculous, a massive building boom that seems to never end, and still exists today. But those, the cost of living crisis has impacted them as well. And I think that, it can be difficult to challenge the division that is created by the ruling class. And I think that in some ways, folks who are precarious, or if they work in, the vast majority of workers who work in, even the service industry versus and public sector, and then you compare that with some folks who work in the trades, that that has been an issue in the past, perhaps may not be as much of an issue now. I mean, it's about finding commonalities on issues that affect everyone. The cost of living crisis is one, but I think that, one issue that really stands out to a lot of workers who are, and a lot of workers are interested in economics. They are interested in how much money they're making. Everyone's got visions. A lot of workers have visions for what they want to do with the money that they make, and they have plans, and et cetera, is to point out the huge gap between, what they're being compensated, even if it is high, what they're being compensated and what their bosses are making on the value that they're creating. And that is universal. That is a universal issue for all workers. If you rely on your labor to survive, then that's an issue that has an impact on you. And I don't think it's as abstract. In fact, it might even be more clear to people who are sheet metal workers building, some of the towers downtown, when they look at how much the condos that they're putting metal up around cost, and where does that money go versus how much they're being compensated to work at dangerous heights in incremental weather. And people ask questions. It's the same in the film industry. It's the same in the auto sector. So, finding those commonalities, I think, is important. And I think that structural issues such as, compensation is a key one. But I would agree that it is a challenge, and in fact, it was a challenge when there was plans for the general strike. Okay, so the unions, which are in the trades in Toronto and in Ontario, were less willing to walk out and put pressure on Doug Ford. In fact, some folks think that they were the intermediaries. Some of their leadership were the intermediaries who negotiated with Doug Ford, because some of the unions, frankly, supported Doug Ford in the provincial election. That's specific to some of the trade unions. That's just the lay of the land here in Ontario. Didn't include Unifor. Unifor is, more focused, in manufacturing and some public sector work as well, or the steel workers who are on side. But the trades in particular, it's a challenge. So, yeah.
Okay, Lisa.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think the first question was about socialist values in time of economic wellness, and I get the sort of point. It seems like mainstream popular electoral politics veer towards conservatism when things are going well, and then as soon as everything collapses, as it always does when neoliberals are in charge, everybody wants to vote for the NDP to save us, and we've seen it in Alberta. We see it all the time here in Canada. So they want socialism when things are tough, and then they want to raid the pantry when things are going well, and they want to take all the money and give it to billionaires when things are going well. And I think a lot of that is how we've gotten into this situation. And I think in order to change that mentality, I think we need to do some of our best organizing when things are well. We need to draw attention to the disparity that comes from what we call economic wellness. You know, when's the last time we've been given another day off? What we got a 2-day weekend now. And we've had that for what, 100 years, over 100 years? Like, I can't remember. I should know, but it's, you know, it's been a long time since we've been given another day off. What about a 9-day fortnight? How come I can't have every other Friday off? How come I can't have every Friday off? If we're doing so well, why are we all still spending a third of our lives at work and then another 2 or 3 hours commuting to work? That's not what I call prosperity. That's what I call exploitation. And you can take this argument and you can apply it across all sorts of disparity. If we're doing so well economically, why does it cost $5 for a head of broccoli? You know, like, it's so yeah, I think we really need to be organizing and pushing during times of so-called economic wellness, pushing this message of, if the economy is so well, why is it so painful for us? Why does a car cost $60,000? Why does a house cost $2.5 million? You know, these are things that working class people need. Shelter's important. Driving around or getting around on public transit is important, not just for us, but to make sure the economy functions. So anyway, I feel like I'm off on a tangent. And I'm going to move on to the other thing, which is the solidarity between occupations within a union or a bargaining unit, which I do agree is a major issue. Like, our bargaining unit, our union represents tons of classifications that all work in healthcare, from trades, food services, laundry, inventory, logistics, truck drivers. And we do constantly have to face groups of members who are like, hey, you know, how come, I understand why we're going for this wage increase, but how come we don't get a little bit extra in our little unit? Because we work a little bit harder than everyone else. And there's this serious misunderstanding between these different occupations of, you know, it seems like every group has a group of people that think that, you know, they deserve a little bit more and everyone deserves a little bit less. And I think that's set up in this competitive capitalist system in order to keep us divided and keep us turning against each other. And I don't think there's a you know, one size fits all solution. I don't think there's a silver bullet solution. I think it's a matter of constantly organizing. The other thing that our current union system has is this system set up where us as union executives and shop stewards are so busy doing the legal business work of the union, talking to managers in closed offices, bargaining, doing OH&S, going to arbitrations, that we don't have that time to meet with the members. If we can get good members in these different occupations who can come to the table, come to the executive table, or just come and be in our social circle, who understand that while they're there, they're not just representing their occupation, but are representing all workers in the bargaining unit, but they do have that special voice from their group. And we constantly do that work of making sure we're not creating a clique of one group of workers that runs the union, that our representation is equitable and diverse. It makes it a bit easier to push back when these little groups of workers say that they want to leave, or they want to join a different union, or they want to fight for more for me and less for everyone else. Thank you. Yeah, I think so, but I don't think there's a solution. I think there's tactics that we can do, but it is going to be an ongoing fight until there's a major shift in the way we view labor in the mainstream.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, folks, we're going for our last round. The speakers list is closed, and we have one question from the chat, and I will go to one from the floor. So Flo, could you read the one from the chat, please?
Sure, that question is from Barry. What is the connection between the fight for class struggle unionism inside labor organizations and the fight for socialist policies inside the New Democratic Party?
Okay, this is question number one. Are you, yeah, okay. question number one. Question number two is coming from Rubina. Would you like to ask your question, comrade?
So actually, I think this one is for Julius. He can answer me better. That usually frontline workers of nonprofit organizations, especially the shelter, VAW shelter workers, those places often feel that workers often feel that unions are not working well, and only they are taking away a portion of their salary only. So how you can improve this situation in union, and that is important because stewards are not very reliable for those workers, and even for women of color is more difficult. So yep, that was the question, that how you can improve it in your local. Yes.
Thank you, Robina. Okay, so you this time around, because we're running out of time, you will have 3 minutes to answer these two questions, and I will start with Lisa, Corey, and then Julius. Lisa?
I didn't quite catch Rubina's question. I'm wondering if she could restate it.
Sure.
So frontline workers, especially VAW sector, workers often feel that union workers are not reliable, and then they don't do anything, only except doing their meeting with the executive directors, that's it. And they are just taking away their portion of their salary. So not to join in the union. So they have counter group not to join in the union. Yeah. So how you can improve the situation in union, that's better to work from union, and how you can apply this in work nonprofit organizations.
Yeah, I think I kind of get it. And it's definitely that that thing again where the union spends so much time doing the business work of the union that we're separated from our members. As for me, like personally, the way I kind of squared the circle, and I don't know if it would work for everyone, but I kind of took myself almost completely out of doing the business of the union. I don't handle grievances. I don't very often talk to managers. I'm the chair of a local. I facilitate the meetings. I do a lot of work politically, but most of my work is meeting with members and encouraging members to get involved. And I think in order to sort of there's always going to be that message that the union takes a lot of our money and they hire people and those people are well paid. I mean, the union does need professionals, but I think the union really needs volunteers as well, and people that are doing work that is not just the business of the union, but get back to the sort of radical organizing of the past, where we were going around meeting with members, and when members do say, oh, I pay your salary, I can say, well, no, you don't. I just stock Band-Aids in the hospital. Everything I do is voluntary. And I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's been about forming those relationships and creating that culture on the floor. I don't know if it'll work for everyone, but I've found pretty decent success at my local doing that. The other question is about the connection between the fight between socialists and the labor movement and the fight for socialism in the New Democratic Party. I am a member of the NDP. I joined to support a person once, but I'm not really that involved in the NDP, and I don't have much faith in electoral politics. But I would say if you're a socialist in the labor movement, you should try and find a way to make peace with the fact that you are going to be around a lot of NDP people. Try to like, I don't know, like just try and be nice, try and put on a brave face. There's so much we can say about politicians, and I've said a lot about politicians. I've said a lot at my executive table. I don't know, like I don't know how to square that circle. The NDP as it exists now is very much a neoliberal capitalist organization. But it's some people's yum. There are socialists that are involved with the NDP, and they're trying their best. and I just try not to yuck other people's yums as a socialist in the labor movement. Just kind of let them have their thing, maybe poke and criticize a little bit, but you know, just realize that it's someone else's thing, and let them let them have their thing.
Okay, Corey?
Yeah, so in terms of winning back disillusioned workers, I guess, I mean, it's something I've seen a lot when I was working at a community living Toronto. I mean, what I've learned now though is like we are the union, right? So I mean, that's where you can start with them and say like you're a member of the union, and you can also get engaged and do things with that. It doesn't help when the union leadership or the establishment isn't engaging members and isn't supporting them and isn't fighting for them. Of course, that doesn't help. But I would start with saying that we are the union, and we do have the potential to change things. And maybe if we volunteer a little bit of our time here and there, we can actually start making a difference and seeing it happen. And then I would also, compare the, I don't know, maybe maybe those frontline positions are not compensated compared to maybe I don't know. I would assume that they get better compensation than ununionized work in the same field, but I can't say that with 100% certainty. So I don't know, but I would say that you have job protection. You should have job protection. You should have better benefits, and so to look at those things and saying if you want to just take your money, you can take it, but you might lose out in the long. You might lose out in the end on the compensation you're getting. From trying to leave the union or trying to duck union fees, I guess, duck union dues. And in terms of the fight between the labor movement and the connection between the fight in the labor movement and the fight in the political establishment, the NDP, predominantly, I guess. Like has been told to me that a lot of and Julius said it earlier, a lot of these leaders, a lot of the people who are leaders are the same people who are connected to this to the same sort of strata of leaders within the workers movement. And so a lot of it is the same sort of battle on both fronts to try and get socialist values and international solidarity values into those establishments. The NDP, I've been very frustrated with the NDP since October when they had some pretty terrible positions on Palestine, and in Ontario they kicked out one of their own members for supporting Palestinian resistance. So I've had a really hard time sort of sort of rationalizing my involvement in the NDP. I've left my local NDP riding association over it. Because we actually have a member of provincial parliament in Queen's Park, and she was someone who justified and was part of kicking out Sarah Gemma from Hamilton Centre from the party, and put up some pretty feeble defense when the Queen's Park muzzled her for her comments, and she still has no voice. Going on months now, she still has no voice in provincial parliament. So it's pretty frustrating, but I mean, I think that just because it's frustrating and bleak doesn't mean we should lose heart. I don't know if the NDP is necessarily, like I said, I've been trying to deal with it myself. If the NDP is the best horse sort of to get the labor movement going, and but unfortunately, I think it's the only horse in town for the labor movement, and it is the only real option. It's where workers are en masse within this country. And so it's the only place to fight in the sort of the political arena for socialist values and the other sort of important solidarity work or other social justice issues that we fight for. And so I would say that on that basis, it is important to try and to right the ship. And I know a lot of members of Socialist Action and other members of the NDP Socialist Caucus have been fighting. Have put a lot of pressure on the NDP and others as well across the country who are members or whatever, have put a lot of pressure, and they have changed their position over time. It's before October It was a long fight, and there were some victories, but the leadership almost ignored them. So that's also another frustrating thing to run up against, is even when you get the highest body, the membership of the NDP, to endorse things, that the leadership just, they have to accept that they've been passed or whatever and been brought into the fold, but they can just basically ignore it in their public speaking, in their communications, and everything they do, which Jagmeet Singh has done on the federal level for a long time. Like I said, due to pressure, it's changed a bit, but it's still pretty bleak. So that's my sort of take on it. I'm pretty frustrated, and I don't know where I'm gonna go in terms of the NDP. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Corey. Julius.
Thanks. So, I mean, our involvement with the NDP is based on its organic ties to the working class and working class organizations. It's not out of any love for party. You know, I have been frustrated with the NDP since I joined the NDP 15, 16 years ago. If I wasn't a revolutionary socialist, I actually would probably have nothing to do with the NDP. I'm only there because of the class dynamic of what the party is and its ties to organized labor, which is also often not fun. I mean, just to remind folks that in the fall, several of us, including myself, had in a very public way had our credentials revoked at the federal convention in Hamilton. In my own union, I've had the police called on me for urging my members to vote against the shitty contract during my ratification vote. In both the labor movement and the NDP, you often have literally the same individuals involved. The ties are organic, and Lisa mentioned this, that, you know, well, you just get used to it. Well, you get used to it because it's just a reality. So we're not there out of any love for the party. We're there because that's where the workers are. And you know, the NDP is in the way and is on the way and in the way to building socialism. And we certainly wouldn't rely on the NDP to become a revolutionary party, but it's difficult to ignore. In regards to Rubina's question about frontline workers and shelters, we've had a few examples of some successes in OPSU recently, and I was not directly involved. But I think that empowering members in those workplaces is really important. You do need to start with some leaders who are willing to take on the boss. If you don't have that, then I think that it's more difficult. That, like, the union is not really and shouldn't be considered as like a service for the membership so much as it is an enabling tool that will help to build the resources and capacity of workers in the workplace to effectively challenge their boss. I'll say too that it's particularly in this work where people are dealing with and assisting people in their communities, that working with those people, activists in those communities, adds a lot of pressure and can help a lot, because the employer they're providing a service to the communities, and if they get the communities against them for the way that they're treating the workers, then that can really help in negotiations. But I'm not an expert. I don't work in that division, but these are some things that I observed in the last little while. Because otherwise you get, and I hear you, Rena, you get arguments, well, the union just takes dues. They don't do anything for me. And that's a very, unfortunately, all too common sentiment. And we have to work to change that. As socialists, we have to work to change that, while acknowledging that the union bureaucrats, frankly, create all kinds of hurdles and barriers to us organizing effectively in many cases. It can turn into a big question around leadership of the labor movement in a very short amount of time. But I've used it in my own division in the Ministry of Environment, in the Ontario Public Service, as president of my union, arguing against the leadership of my division, arguing and campaigning against concessionary agreements. I did that. I've done that for 15 years, and all it's done is gotten me elected to higher and higher positions in my union. So, you know, some people are afraid to shake the bushes and rustle the feathers, but it seems to have worked in my case, and that, you know, I've pissed a lot of people off along the way, and I've gotten support from some of those people that I pissed off along the way at different times, unexpectedly, by the way. So it's interesting how things work out, but we have to try. If we don't try, then nothing changes.
Thank you, Julius. And thank you all to all of our speakers, Lisa, Corey, and Julius, and to folks who put questions forward. Okay, so the next panel starts at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So enjoy this break, stay tuned, and be ready for the next session in, well, exactly, I think 1 hour. And the session, of course, is Eco-Catastrophe or Eco-Socialism with Angela Bischoff, Stephen Crozier, and Tom Baker. So see you all back at 7, folks. Take care.